Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. We are Group 58. My name is Sanjida Rahman. I'm second year environmental engineering student. Here is my group mate. They will gonna introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shakir Hussain. I'm first year pursuing my master's in civil engineering, construction project management specialization.
Okay, my name is Ebenezer J. I'm a second year master student reading chemical engineering.
Okay.
Our topic for presentation is the Minamata Disease, a tragic case of industrial pollution and human suffering that began in Japan's Kumamoto prefecture. So the overview of the case is, in the early 1950s, residents of small coastal town of Minamata started noticing strange symptoms in both humans and animals. People were losing coordination, struggling to speak, and even experiencing convulsions. Later, scientists discovered that this was caused by methylmercury poisoning. The source was wastewater from the Chizo's Corporation's chemical factory, which used mercury in its production process and released it directly into Minamata Bay. Over time, fish and shellfish, the community's main food source, became heavily contaminated. Thousands of people were affected, including unborn children who developed congenital Minamata disease. The Japanese government officially recognized the case in 1968, and decades later, this tragedy inspired global action, leading to the 2013 United Nations Minamata Convention on Mercury to prevent similar disasters worldwide. The consequences of Minamata disease were devastating on multiple levels. First, the human toll. Thousands were affected, many died, and families faced lifelong disabilities and stigma. Babies were born with severe neurological damage, showing how far the contamination had spread. Second, the environment suffered tremendously. Mercury bioaccumulation wiped out marine life and destroyed the fishing industry that sustained the local economy. Ethically, this case revealed corporate negligence. Chizo continued its operation even when evidence of mercury poisoning was clear. The government's delayed response also deepened the damage. Victims fought legal battles for decades just to be recognized and compensated. Overall, Minamata became a symbol of how profit driven decisions and weak regulation can lead to human and ecological catastrophe. Through the timeline. In 1932, Chizo began using mercury in its production process. By 1956, the first official case of Minamata disease was reported. In 1959, scientists confirmed the link between the disease and mercury in seafood, but Chizo denied responsibility and continued discharging waste. It wasn't until 1968 that the Japanese government officially acknowledged the company's role. Over the following decades, victims continued to fight for justice, with multiple court rulings ordering compensation. Finally, in 2013, the United Nations introduced the Minamata Convention on Mercury, a global treaty to control mercury pollution. In summary, the Minamata case stands as a historical reminder of the need for ethical responsibility, transparency, and environmental protection in industrial practices.
Next is the ethical dilemma. The ethical dilemma refers to the failures in moral judgment, transparency, and responsibility which were exhibited by the engineers, Chiso Corporation, and the Japanese government. We can see that there was prioritization of profit. They ignored scientific findings. The government wanted to protect the company. There was stigmatization of victims, and there was violation of the human rights of the weak and vulnerable in the society. Next is the technical errors versus ethical dilemma. In the nature aspect, we can see that there was a failures in design, analysis, and process control in the technical error, whilst there was failures in moral judgment, responsibility, and honesty in the ethical dilemma. In the cost aspect, we can see that there was a lack of environmental and risk assessment of the project in the technical error. In the ethical dilemma, we can see that there was prioritizing profit and reputation over human welfare. The main actors in the technical error were engineers, plant operators, and scientists. However, in the ethical dilemma, the main attacks were corporate executives and government officials. The outcome, we can see that in the technical error, there was a mercury pollution and bioaccumulation of the environment. In the ethical dilemma, there was prolonged suffering, denial of justice, and social discrimination. The lesson in the technical error is that we need to improve environmental safety systems and early monitoring. In the ethical dilemma, the lesson is that one needs to uphold transparency, accountability, and social responsibility. The connection of ethical dilemma to engineering. The Minamata case illustrates that the true engineering practice requires ethical responsibility to guide technical expertise. When engineers disregard safety, transparency, and integrity, small technical oversights can grow into major human and environmental disasters. This demonstrates that engineering is not only a technical discipline, but also a moral vocation grounded in accountability and public welfare.
Now I'm going to discuss about ethical framework analysis. The Minamata case clearly shows ethical failures from several perspectives. From a deontological view, which focuses on duties, both GSO Corporation and authorities ignored their duty to protect human health and disclose risk. From consequentialist perspective, their action caused severe harm, widespread illness, death, long-term suffering over economic benefits. And from a virtue ethics perspective, there was a lack of honesty, integrity, and moral courage. Engineers and decision makers failed to act with responsibility when it mattered most. Together, these frameworks highlight that this issue wasn't just technical, it was deeply ethical. Now about the discussion question. The Japanese government delayed formally recognizing Chiso's role for more than a decade after first case appeared. To what extent is it ethically acceptable for a government to prioritize economic stability and local employment over immediate public health and protection? What mechanisms should be in place to prevent such delays in future crises? Our second discussion question is, evidence later showed that GSO tried to suppress or influence scientific findings that linked the company's waste to the disease. What ethical obligation do engineers and scientists and corporations have to ensure transparency and honesty in reporting data, even when it may harm their reputation or profits? Our third discussion question is, even after the factory stopped discharging mercury, the environmental damage and social impact persisted for decades. What lessons does Minamata case teach about an engineer's ethical duty to consider the long-term consequences of their design process and decision on both ecosystem and human communities? Here are three lessons we learned from Minamata. First is to pay attention. Safety should always be prioritized at the forefront of thoughts, especially when dealing with chemical production. If people noticed it earlier, then the damage to humans, animals, and ecosystem would have been much smaller. The second lesson is that negligence can lead to a disaster. When Chiso first opened their factory, they knew about their wastewater products but didn't say anything about it. The downstream effects were not taken into account, thus mercury turned into Minamata. Additionally, there are some neglect from government as well. Um, Even after knowing everything, Ministry of Health and Welfare of Japan waived it and saying that there was no clear evidence that all fish were poisoned in the bay. Lastly, we learned from the disaster the importance of communication. Surrounding people should have been notified about their waste disposal. If they knew about it, the issue would have been looked into and got into much sooner. Instead, residents didn't know they were getting poisoned for decades. Also, government didn't hear any words from the researcher. If they communicate earlier, situation would have been much less worsened than what actually happened. Clearly, communication is the essential part to prevent a disaster. Here is all our references. Thank you so much for listening us. If you have any question, please let us know.